we don't use our brains for a lot of creativity or like problem solving in a way that does feel like that escapism. It's problem solving on how we're going to pay our bills or what our new insurance is, like all of the adulting stuff that is not fun. And this is like getting to use our brains in those fun and creative and unique ways. It's like exercising our brains, but with fantasy. So it's so much more fun than real world.
Amen. And good on you for bringing the millennial angle into this, because
of course, I got to know my audience.
Welcome to Millennial, the home of pretend adulting and real talk. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Pamela.
And today we're going to have a pop culture-oriented chat about fantasy series and adapting them from book to screen. And to help us with today's discussion, we're so excited to be joined by Nicole and Lexi of Fantasy Fangirls, the podcast. Welcome, you two.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So I've been on your pod. You've also been on MuggleCast. Now you're on Millennial. So we're so grateful that you've made some time for us today. One of our mutual friends, acquaintances, Hayden, actually initially connected us. He's been a longtime listener of our podcast, and I had heard about you guys, and then when I found out that he was working with you guys, I was like, whoa, mind blown, small world.
Well, and then MuggleCast was I've been a diehard Potterhead forever. And so MuggleCast was the very first podcast I listened to, probably before it was even called podcasting. So it was like just such a dream come true.
We got it super
to
early.
Come onto that show. Yeah.
Yeah. Aw. Well, and we got started really early because I've always been a computer nerd, and I started hearing about podcasts in 2004. And I was like, this is cool. We should do one for a Harry Potter fan site. And I kept that secret online. I didn't dare go out in public and announce that I was doing a Harry Potter podcast, but now podcasting is cool.
Right? Exactly. I totally get it. I was a closet Potterhead as well.
Well, and I think actually, so we're going to talk about Fantasy Fangirls and its success, but I think Fantasy Fangirls has probably been really popular for a reason that MuggleCast has as well. It's like a place where you can find your Harry Potter friends, your Fourth Wing friends, your ACOTAR friends. So tell us about Fantasy Fangirls and why you think it took off.
Well, so we're two sisters. So I'm Lexi and this is Nicole. And we really rediscovered our love for fantasy books last fall. I know I was saying I was a big Potterhead, and while Harry Potter has always had such a special place, as we get older, as us millennials start having to adult, things like fun reading kind of fall off the wayside, right? And we all just start focusing on personal development and bettering ourselves and da-da-da-da-da. And it was surprising to us, actually, that once, when I say Nicole first, because she got into these books and then she literally forced me to read them because I'm a mom of two young kids. Like the idea of reading for fun was just like not even on my radar. And she made me. And
I gave her no choice. Like, she's not exaggerating. My little sister shamed her into reading these books.
You will read these books.
But for us, it was so much more therapeutic than any of those personal development stuff, because it gave us an outlet. It gave us this kind of escape that I think that we really do. We act like it's a bad thing, and we're really embracing it. And that's really what Fantasy Fangirls is about, is embracing like the nerdy love for fantasy. And some people are just now rediscovering it from, when they were kids, like we are, and really like learning how to love fantasy as adults now and being okay with it and excited about it. And other people are, like, especially when it comes to like these deep dives, like it's not just, some people call it like fairy porn, or it's not just like a bunch of like stupid stuff. It's real meaningful literature with real character analyses and just such great stories that we really want to let them shine and appreciate them for the great works of art that they are. So kind of going back to how we started. So Nicole had made me start listening. And when I say listening / reading, we're both audiobook listeners because, again, two kids, I got a lot of stuff going on all the time.
And I just don't read. I just listen. I just don't read.
We started talking, theories and character analysis and like foreshadowing nuggets and all of those things. And we thought it'd be really fun to just take our extensive conversations and our text messages to the microphone. And we started a podcast that deep dives a book at a time. And, we were just initially going to kick off the podcast with A Court of Thorns and Roses, aka ACOTAR. ACOTAR, but we ended up starting it with Fourth Wing instead because it had like a perfectly timed lead up to its sequel that was coming out in November, which is called Iron Flame. And that was just kind of like how the roots of Fantasy Fangirls got started.
Amazing. And then it became successful pretty quick.
So we were dropping clips in the lead up to this like inaugural Fourth Wing episode being released. And Lexi and I should mention, like, we had no community, no nothing. We were like, if we get 20 downloads in the first week, we're going to be so excited. And so we start posting these videos on TikTok and Instagram. And because of the buzz around Fourth Wing, we started going viral and viral and viral. And like for 10 weeks straight, just basically didn't stop going viral. And because of that, the podcast, just like the word of mouth started spreading like crazy. So we ended that first week, I think, with just shy or maybe even just over 5,000 downloads in that first week. And then we hit our first 1 million downloads in 3 months, which for people who do not podcast, that's unheard of. I'm going to toot our own horn for a second. It's unheard of. We still are like, is this real?
Yeah.
It's like a scheme. But one of the reasons I think it also got so popular is, yes, the popularity of these books. Yes, the popularity of book talk. But like Lexi was saying, it's like there's now this no longer the shame around escapism. And I think people are really embracing it more and more and more. And these tend to just be the really popular series that people are like the gateway drugs almost into this like romantasy genre. And we just happen to do a podcast about it in a deep dive format that wasn't really being done in podcasting at the time.
Yeah. Well, and I'll toot y'all's horn. You're both really fun and cool and like you're entertaining to listen to too. So
Thank
you got to pat yourself on the back for that as well. I mean, not anybody can just do this and you got to bring some energy to it. And you two bring a lot of energy. So I'm sure that's the reason.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it helps a lot that, you know, I've known Lexi for 30 years. Like it helps that like we're sisters and like we have these, you know, jokes from childhood. And you know,
we just like have that banter already you could say embedded into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it made it so much easier to find those inside jokes that, you know, some like you both are podcasters. It takes a while to find that rhythm. And it still took Lexi and I a minute. And when we switched to ACOTAR, we were like, oh, you know, we've done this for 52 hours with all of the Empyrean books. And we were still like, how to podcast. We don't know what we did. So hard. That first episode.
Mike recommendations. Google.
Yes, exactly.
It was very stressful, but it allowed us to fall into a rhythm a lot easier, which I think a lot of podcasts, I mean, I had a podcast beforehand. I had a podcast for about 5 years, and it took me about 1.5 years before I found my rhythm with that as a solo show, which I will never do again. So.
Yeah, that's tough.
No. And the other thing too, for Nicole and I, is that we are two very different types of readers as well. And so Nicole, for instance, she's more of the romantic at heart. She loves the smut and all of the purrs and all of the delicious things like that. And then I'll say more of like the fantasy lore nerd. Like I love my high fantasy. I know more about the histories and politics of Game of Thrones than I do about the United States. Probably it's probably actually embarrassing, but it's true. And so we took each of our elements, and it really, of course, like with these series like romantasy, it perfectly blends together. So we have the fantasy and the lore and the plot to really shine, and we also have the celebration of the spiciness.
Yeah.
I love the spice.
I know you do. Oh no, not the spices stuff again, Nicole.
Hold off on this episode.
We talk about anything and everything that we want here, but so you can feel free to go off whenever you want, including in After Dark today. We will talk about smut.
Give me a microphone and I'm on a pedestal.
Well, yeah, and speaking of the escapism, I think, you know, sometimes like here on this show, we talk about serious topics, but it can be a lot for people. And like us too, as podcasters, like we don't always want to be focusing on the serious real world stuff. I think like with MuggleCast and with Fantasy Fangirls, this is a nice escape from your everyday life as well, just to tune out and forget about the real world, which you got to do from time to time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you two have actually made this a full-time gig now?
We did. We just pivoted. So I just transitioned. God, was that last month? That was last month. Yes. I just transitioned to full-time last month. And said goodbye to, I was an entrepreneur for 5 years. So I closed down my other company and went full time in this one. And Lex, you're transitioning out of part-time.
Yeah, so I do freelancing. You could say I'm a full-time stay-at-home mom, and then I've been doing freelancing since I left my big corporate job. And so I have now told all of my clients, I have 2 remaining clients, and I had stopped accepting anything else a while back, but I told them that I'm fully transitioning out this month. And they were like, "What?" Like they're like, "Wait, this podcast, wait, what?" So yeah, so I'm transitioning out.
Did you say because of my fantasy book podcast series, or like?
One of them did finally ask what the podcast was about, and I told her, and she's like, "Wait, I love Sarah J. Maas books." And so like she's like, "Oh, I need to start listening to your podcast." And I was like, "Okay, it's rated R, so please just know that going into it, the things that I talk about."
Yeah.
But she got really excited for us. So yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't had to leave like a corporate job, but when I tell new people that I meet like about the podcast stuff, it's hard for people to believe it. It's like with peace and love to all actors in Hollywood. It's like when you meet somebody in Hollywood, they say, "I'm an actor." And you're like, all right, what do you really do? Because
what's your serving job?
Right.
I lived in LA for 3 months and I was a server. And it was like the weirdest thing that I was the only person who was not an actor. Like literally our tables would ask me what, like, "Oh, like, are you an actress or a model?" It's like, nope, I'm the only one who's not here. Cause yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, and it's my full-time job. I promise. This is the real deal for me.
It's so funny. Like when Nicole and I will, like, for instance, we were having a workday session at a coffee shop / brewery, which was awesome. And we saw that the bartender was reading a book called Air of Fire, which is another one of Sarah J. Maas's books. And so we pointed out and she started talking about how, yeah, her and all of her coworkers, they've been reading these books, blah, blah. And we're like, "Oh yeah, like we actually have like a podcast about them." She's like, "Oh, like kind of like oh, like that's cute sort of thing." So and she asked her like what it was called, and we told her, and then we go back, and and then when I came back for another drink a while later, you could tell she looked it up. She's like, "Oh my God," like like all the questions she started asking were no longer like, "Oh, that's cute, tell me about your podcast," but it was like, "Oh my God, hello."
You guys are celebrities online. Like, damn.
People actually pay attention. Wow.
That's amazing. Yeah. Wow. Well, it's such an amazing success story, and people have said podcasting is over the hill, but with Fantasy Fangirls, here's an example of like a podcast that has taken off and been so successful, thanks in part to TikTok and the personalities and the analysis that you bring to your show. So it's just, it should be giving everybody hope. Like I go to these podcast conferences and it's like, how do I grow the podcast? How do I make money? And valid questions, of course. And then there's always this talk of like, are we past the bubble, stuff like that. Like it can still happen. I'm not saying it's easy, but it can happen. It's possible.
So I was actually at a podcasting conference last year, and it was several weeks before Lexi and I even had the thought of starting Fantasy Fangirls. And I was there for my other show, and I sit at these, like panels or whatever. And it's all these bros, right? They're up there and being like, "Oh yeah, like get 10,000 downloads a month or else you're screwed." And it's like
Bitcoin.
all of these like, and it was all these insane numbers, at least in my head at the time. And I was like, I'm never going to be that successful. I'm never going to da. And so I actually get in my car. I have a full-blown mental breakdown, and I'm calling Lexi, and I'm like, "I'm never going to make it. This is just a pipe dream. This is never going to happen for me." And she's like, "You're here for a reason. You're getting some kind of information that's going to help you down the line at some point." And little did she know I was just going to drag her down.
I was going to be involved in it either.
But it's like, I love that conference because the next day I went and I like sat at a bunch of different panels that were not like the like how to grow your podcast. And they all say the same 5 things.
Yeah.
It was like more about the creativity aspect. It was more about the community aspect that can be involved in podcasting. And the irony is like, that's what Fantasy Fangirls became. It was such a creative outlook for me. It was such a community that Lexi and I mistakenly built. We did not mean to build this 100,000 person community, but here we are. And we love it so much. And it's like, it was so much more about the service aspect than the like business. And when I tapped into that, I started having so much more fun again. And so I think that I think honestly, any creative outlook when you look at it that way, it's just 10 times better.
Yeah.
Podcasting included.
Just sort of following your heart. So anyway, one reason we wanted to have you on today was to talk about ACOTAR, which has been brought up a couple of times now.
Yeah. So I think that Court of Thorns and Roses, ACOTAR is probably something that people have heard online in passing, even if they're not initiated. But for the uninitiated, we thought that we would put you both on the spot and ask if you can explain what ACOTAR is in a nutshell for people that have not had have had the pleasure of picking up the book themselves.
Myself included. Tell me all about it.
Laura and I have read it, but Andrew's still out in the cold.
It's been on my radar, of course. I see people reading it and hear about it.
I'll do like the shortest Reader's Digest version ever because I also don't want to give any spoilers away. So imagine a world where a girl lives in poverty and she's forced to go to the dreaded fairylands. And these are not fairies like little winged fairies. These like fairies like
fairies,
big scary monsters, like fairies, like big scary monster fairies. This land is called Prithian, and she learns about a curse that hovers over one of the 7 courts. Book 1, which if you're watching is right here, A Court of Thorns and Roses, is really a beautiful story, but book 2 is there to it is the foundation of the story that takes off. Book 1, I look at almost as like the prequel where it walks so that book 2 can run. This is where it becomes more of an epic tale that has truly, when we're talking about, taken over the internet. It's a fairy retelling of Beauty and the Beast. That's all I want to say because I don't want to give any spoilers away. Andrew,
we appreciate
read
that,
it.
Andrew.
Yeah.
There's so many plot twists and turns that I can't say too much.
Okay,
That's a great way to phrase it too, because I have gone on the record many times on this show talking about how I'm very intimidated by high fantasy. So it took me a really long time to finally dig into this series because my best friend's been begging since like 2014, you have to read these, you have to read these. And I was always just so scared of the world building. But once it clicked that it was a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, that was such an easy touchstone to kind of hang on to until, the story really gripped me about maybe 50, 100 pages in. And then I was like, okay, I'm here. I'm in it.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to work out.
Yeah.
but do you still consider it high fantasy? Does it is it?
I would say it's higher fantasy than Fourth Wing.
Yeah.
But it's still not I wouldn't say it's like Lord of the Rings level. That's like how my fantasy-o-meter works. It's
You're-
is it Lord of the Rings
the same
or is
books.
it-
I'm right there with you. Yeah, like my high fantasy, I'll say 10 meter, or let's just be my 5 meter is the Song of Ice and Fire and
that's a good
Lord
one
of the
too.
Rings, and then my 1 meter. I don't know what the one would
It's like
be.
Harry Potter is good because there's still a real world
Harry Potter's a
element,
great
right?
example.
That's a good touchstone.
Yeah, I would probably put the ACOTAR at a 2.5 or 3.
Yeah.
No, yeah, 2.5, and that's
I
just
would
for
say
me.
2.5.
And I think for me, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, I would put that similar, at a 2. But it's also an incomplete series. So I do think that as we continue with each of the books, there's all those building blocks as you get further along. I have a feeling that it will ultimately become more like a 3. Yeah, more like a 3.
Yeah. But by that point, we're all in it. So
Exactly.
it's fine.
You're already along for the ride.
Yeah.
Rebecca Yarros did write those books also to be the gateway into the fantasy world. She's written contemporary for forever. So this was really her first fantasy series that she wrote. And so when Rebecca Yarros was approached by her publisher saying hey, do you want to start a fantasy line for our publishing company? She was like, heck yeah, I do. And thus Fourth Wing was born. But she made it that level 1.752 for a reason. But I definitely think the way that it's going to get up to a 3. I don't know if it's going to go higher than a 3. I do think that, for instance, the 3rd book in the ACOTAR series, I think that gets up to a 3.5, maybe even a 3.75. It does get a little more world building. But by then, all the characters, all the places, where you're going. So it's a lot easier to grasp.
This is good to know because I'm not a high fantasy fan. Lord of the Rings is too much for me. Game of Thrones feels like it's too much for me.
Yeah.
The TV show I can handle, and the movies, of course, but yeah, it's a lot.
Well, to continue on with the ACOTAR craze, why would you both say that this series ended up taking off the way it did? Because it's been steadily climbing. I feel like I've never seen more fans, but then it's always been popular.
Again, without saying any spoilers, I'm going to say book 2 is the reason that this series became what it is. book 2 is what made me again truly fall in love with reading again. It's what made me sit down with Lexi and be like, you have no choice, you're forced to read these books. It's one of those stories that rattles you to the core. It's romantic, it's steamy, it puts you in this world that you just want to jump into and live there, like that escapism like we were talking about earlier. But I also think that the series is so popular because Sarah J. Maas knows how to emotionally destroy you on a level that not a lot of us emotionally destroy on a regular basis. She's known for the last 100 pages to just be absolutely rattling. It's known for like this, oh, you think you have a handle of the story. You think you know how it's going to go. And then the last like 200, 100 pages, it's like a hard left turn, Dukes of Hazzard, and you're just like gripping on for dear life. So I think that the shock factor, the unexpectedness of these stories also is a huge reason why they became so popular.
Well, and then piggybacking off of that, I actually read a really interesting article. It was on Vox by Constance Grady, and it discusses Sarah J. Maas's formula. And so she is really fantastic at taking a concept that is pleasantly familiar to the reader. So for instance, with ACOTAR, it's Beauty and the Beast. I'd even throw in a little bit of Hunger Games in there, like with the heroine, like stories that are familiar to us. I also, for me, I see some Witcher in there too when it comes to the fantasy and the like creature side of things. And then she gives it a twist to really just delight and surprise you. So it's like familiar, but it's new at the same time. And like Nicole was just saying there, like, you know, with that last 100 pages of her books, as well as book 2 really took a different turn there as well. And so she takes these fairy tale stories like Beauty and the Beast and tropes that we know and love, and she turns them into something new and unique. And that is what people like really makes people lean in.
Saying that, it's almost like a fan fiction strategy or formula. And I'm not saying that like as a negative thing. It's just she's doing it on a much larger scale. Because like with fan fiction, there's comfort in the familiarity and you're kind of exploring this world that you already love. You're mentioning Beauty and the Beast, Hunger Games, you know, you're taking these touch points that people already love and expanding on them, doing your own thing. Is that a fair comparison?
It's not something I've thought of, but I could vibe with that.
Yeah. I see it. I hadn't thought of it like that, but yeah, I can definitely see that.
But then Pam, also to answer your question in regards to why has it gained so much popularity recently, some people know, some people don't know this going into the series, but all of Sarah J. Maas's series, she has 3 of them, Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City, are all a part of a multiverse. So think almost like Avengers style, basically. And
this is not spoilers. This is just like
this is
fact.
Not spoilers,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
But one of the things that the fandom has like just grasped onto like nobody's business is the crossover theories and what could this mean in this world, and really like parsing through every single line of this text and then looking at the other 2 series and saying, how does it compare? So I think the fact that it's so much bigger than just like 2 books, 5 books, 7 books, it's the whole 17 or whatever, 15, whatever,
16, 17 books. Yeah.
It's teen X amount here.
It's all like
connected. It's all connected. And because of that, people have so much fun figuring out the puzzle pieces and the Tetris. I think it's one of the reasons Fourth Wing got so popular with Iron Flame's release. It's like we were all obsessing over theories. And even though 1 out of the 3 series is that's a word I talk for a living.
Something like that.
Is completed, people are still theorizing over so many things in these worlds. So I think that that's another reason why recently it's gained so much popularity, especially.
And this last release, right, is the one that it really connects everything.
Correct. Yes, without saying spoilers, one of her highly anticipated new book came out on January 30th, I believe. And so everybody was getting prepared, you know, doing all their rereads beforehand. I mean, like Book Talk was bopping with it. And
it was an intimidating place to be. Book Talk.
Yes. always.
I was just going to say, like with Book Talk, with podcasts like Fantasy Fangirls, like the speculation is a lot of fun. That's more escape for people. It's something for people to think about. Like when we started MuggleCast, the 6th Harry Potter book had just come out. Like all the theories about book 7, my God. And then going back to Fourth Wing, all the theories about Iron Flame, and now going forward with the next few books. It really gets a fandom going, just like all the speculation. And then when you add this like multiverse element, it's just like a whole other world.
Absolutely.
It's been very intimidating going into this deep dive. Because like we are just covering the ACOTAR series and that's how we do our deep dives. However, because of the Maasverse spread out and all the knowledge and the hype around that fandom right now, we were like, okay, at the very end of episodes, on some episodes, we're going to do something called a mass verse madness, where it's basically like, from this stretch of chapters, what other mass verse isms are there in here? And that's where Lexi and I have been like, oh dear God. It's been so intense, but it's fun. It's also fun because we're parsing through the internet, we're looking at things, and it's wild. It's a wild ride.
Your spreadsheet must be crazy.
Our type A ass is pretty obsessed. Yes.
Well, but like to that point too, like especially for us millennials, like we get so just like in the day ins and day outs of our work and our family, and like we don't use our, I'll say this might sound harsh, we don't use our brains for a lot of creativity or like problem solving in a way that does feel like that escapism. It's problem solving on how we're going to pay our bills or what our new insurance is, like all of the adulting stuff that is not fun. And this is like getting to use our brains in those fun and creative and unique ways that are still problem solving, that are still really creative and fun, and going out there and puzzle pieces and all of that just so many of us love and eat up, and it makes us think in new and creative ways. And it's like exercising our brains, but with fantasy. So it's so much more fun than real world.
Amen. And good on you for bringing the millennial angle into this, because
of course, I gotta know my audience.
I didn't even think about that. Great point, though. Yeah, it's stuff you want to do. You want to speculate. You don't want to deal with bills. You want to theorize and dive into book talk and all that. That's a really excellent point.
Mm-hmm.
Tax season's coming up.
Oh, no.
Don't get me started, Andrew. This is my first year as a freelancer, and I'm like so terrified of doing my taxes.
Hey, we can talk about that after the show. I've already been through this. If you need help, if you need advice.
That doesn't sound nearly as much fun as this conversation.
Well, what I did is I hired an accountant, so they deal with it. I don't even think about it anymore, so I can continue having fun.
Nicole's got one of those too. I don't for my own business from last year.
Because I was an entrepreneur for 5 years, I knew like, okay, here's what we need to like, here's who we can hire on, here's who we don't need to hire on, here's a way to automate that and stuff like that. So like, some people, with the explosion of fantasy fangirls, a lot of people have been like, oh my God, this overnight success story, meh. And I'm just like, no. Because like this was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from both Lexi and I, and getting prepared for this just unknowingly. And that is just one of those ways that just happened to be through an accountant. And thank God, because I hate looking at numbers.
Yeah, I know. I don't like looking
I'll look at fantasy numbers any day, not real life numbers.
It was fun helping my accountant like the first couple years with words like Patreon. Like she's like, what is a Patreon and why is money coming in from this?
Oh man, that reminds me of when Nicole and I had to explain our new business on like the one of the first days of January. We went to the bank, we opened up our own business account. It was very exciting, and we had to explain to the banker what our business was, and you could tell it was not one of the check boxes that she had available.
Like we talk about fairy porn.
You hear fantasy fangirls and you're like, what kind of OnlyFans?
Yeah.
Oh my God. We get that, like my in-laws, like it's all in good fun, but man, they have some dark humor, and it's like,
oh God,
it's not like that. That.
I've been in like the YA world for so long that didn't even register with me, but now I could totally see that. Fantasy fangirls. Yeah. Damn.
It's one of those things where you have to be like, but wait, it's like it's not what you think.
Yeah.
It's like we're rated R, but not like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
We're rated
right.
R, but not for that reason. Usually.
So after a quick break, we'll talk a bit more about ACOTAR before discussing adapting fantasy series into television and movies, and how many changes we're willing to tolerate. We'll be right back.
Well, before we got derailed with fun things like taxes, we were talking about diving into the ACOTAR series and the Sarah J. Maas universe at large. So with all that being said, that could be a little bit daunting for people to think about in terms of like the wide scale connections. But do you still recommend that people who haven't read ACOTAR give it a shot?
Oh, absolutely. That's See, Andrew? Absolutely.
I genuinely do want to read it. I think it's next on my list because, first of all, I've always been intrigued by the covers. Like, they really pop, and the variety of them. The
redesigns are so cool now. Like, the colors are great. I love having them on my shelf.
Yeah, you just want to hold them. They look great. So that alone has me wanting to pick up the books. But yeah, there comes a point for me, and I'm late on ACOTAR, but there comes a point where like people are talking about something so much, I just have to read it or watch it. I can't miss out. And ACOTAR has definitely hit that. That's what I felt about Fourth Wing like last year at some point.
Have you finished Iron Flame yet?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, good. Nice.
Yeah, it was great.
If you liked Iron Flame and Fourth Wing, you're going to really like it's very different. The pacing is very different. The writing style is very different. But it's in the same genre for a reason. I'll put it that way.
I've also turned into an audiobook person recently, and I'm talking very recently, but yeah, and we've been talking a lot about escapism today. I walk my dog for like between the 3 walks that I do with him about an hour a day. And that's a lot of time that I could be getting through some books. Whereas previously I was just listening to podcasts, and it's like, I've been loving listening to audiobooks on the walk because I'm truly like disconnecting from the real world for a while. Whereas when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm still in it. I'm still hearing about news and crap. So that's been a nice.
And you can do the dynamic audiobooks for A Court of Thorns and Roses.
That's my not request or
recommendation.
My obsession recommendation. Yeah. There it is. At the end of this is the dramatized version. So it's basically like, think about like a movie, but for your ears.
Oh, cool.
So it's the audiobook, but it's a full cast. It's got sounds. It's got music. Now, do keep in mind that this is smut. And it does have sounds.
Oh.
Put 2 and 2 together for that. I can talk about that in the After Dark section because it does get graphic.
I'll have to cover my sweet dog's ears during those scenes.
Yeah, protect the innocent. But it is really cool, and it does immerse you in the story in a whole new way. Plus, it's nice to have the different character voices. I do think the audiobook narrator, Jennifer Ikeda, for A Court of Thorns and Roses does a phenomenal job. So
awesome.
You are in good hands.
Good to know. Yeah, I will be reading / listening to the first one soon. But there's going to be another adaptation to enjoy, right, Pam? Maybe.
Yes. So the reason we wanted to talk about ACOTAR and set everything up for you all is because of this piece of news that we got kind of towards the middle of last month. So Hulu has been working on an ACOTAR TV series adaptation for quite a while now, but it sounds like it might be in a little bit of trouble. But I do want to preface all of this by saying that you shouldn't like freak out just yet, because it just seems like things are up in the air right now. So what happened was last month, TV Line reported that the adaptation was not moving forward at Hulu, but it looks like they kind of jumped the gun here because Variety reported after the fact that the series is, quote, technically still in development on Hulu, but it is believed to no longer be in active development, which means it's unclear what the fate of the project will be. So there are a number of reasons why this could be the case. It could just be that they haven't found the right creative team to take this on. It could also have been affected by the strikes last year in Hollywood. So it's just kind of one of those things that is remained to be seen if you're keeping tabs on this. So the project has been in development since 2021. And the last we heard, it was actually going to be helmed by Ronald D. Moore, who is most notably known for show running Outlander. So he has like this adaptation experience under his belt. And author Sarah J. Maas was also set to assist with scripts, but there's no word on whether or not she's still going to be involved in that aspect. So that could also be a reason why this is maybe taking a little bit longer to get off the ground, if she pulled out, or maybe if Ron pulled out too. So that's where we are.
The plot has thickened, though.
Ooh, tell me more.
I'll spill the tea.
Yes.
So last week, Sarah J. Maas and Margot Robbie were seen at a coffee shop in New York City, and that caused Book Talk to have a collective heart attack. So many people think that this is because she's wanting Margot Robbie to come on and play a certain role. Now, IGN did report back in January that Margot Robbie is wanting to step away from acting and lean more into production and more into her producing resume. And so there is a possibility that maybe things didn't work out with Robert D. Moore, or maybe it's the collective team with Margot Robbie as well. Personally, I do think that these are two very non-disclosure agreement level contract or conversations. So would that be happening in a busy coffee shop in New York City? Possibly not, but it is fun to think about if Margot Robbie would be a part of this creative team. Some people have also thought about, I was mentioning the Massverse earlier. Are they wanting to move away from just doing the ACOTAR series as like a linear storytelling on, on Hulu? Or are they wanting to do almost like Game of Thrones styles, the entire Massverse, where like, you have ACOTAR and then you cut away to Throne of Glass and you cut away to Lunathian and all of these different things? I think that would be a lot.
I can't even imagine no, just
they
no.
would have to cut out so much, which gets me really nervous as like a lover of these stories. But I could see them wanting to bring on Margot Robbie as a producer or some kind of level of the creative team.
That would be new for her too, because I don't think I've seen her do anything high fantasy yet, but it might be something that she wants to sink her teeth into. And to your point about them maybe wanting to tackle, the Massverse at large, if you will, Hulu also owns the rights as it stands currently to the Throne of Glass TV series adaptation. So that's actually been on the back burner for even longer. They announced that in 2016. And I know that people were freaking out about that and about whether they would have the ability to even like do a good adaptation because it's so high fantasy. So...
Well, and some people are wondering if Margot Robbie would come on to play the female main character in Throne of Glass. But I did do some Google search, and Margot Robbie is 33, and the main character in that series is supposed to be like 18, 19, sometimes even 17 and 16. So I don't think that would be the case. That's why I'm thinking she's going to come in as more of like a producer level role and maybe a character down the line. But I think given especially Margot Robbie's recent incredible portrayals with Barbie and all of these different things, like I think she would be incredible paired with Sarah J. Maas. That is a team that gets me excited.
Well, and also isn't and I think you might have been the one to tell me this, Nicole, is that she loves Sarah J. Maas's work too. She loves the fantasy. She loves all of her books and her work. So also not to
that makes sense because she's a big Harry Potter fan, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
so she loves these worlds already. So to Nicole's point earlier too about like they're meeting in a busy New York coffee shop, they could also just be two friends who met at a coffee shop.
Exactly.
Imagine using your connections just to call up your favorite author. Like
Sarah J. Maas just wanted to talk about Barbie for a little while, maybe.
Right?
Honestly.
Well, backing up a little bit to the ACOTAR TV series, with this news story that came out last month in mind, I mean, are we worried about whether this is bad news for us? Okay. Please tell me more.
Well, it's worrying to me because this pause or whatever is going on, I think it says to me it's less about the popularity of the series, because obviously it's very popular, and more about having troubles assembling a creative team that Hulu is happy with, or maybe Sarah J. Maas is happy with. And I mean, that could be a huge problem. It's just sometimes things don't work out for a lot of reasons. Like we've seen this happen again and again with like, I think about Star Wars. That's like an ongoing example of how they like hire people and then they part ways because they're not doing exactly because Lucasfilm brass isn't doing exactly what the creators want. It's that sometimes, unfortunately, they just hit these really bad snags. And in the book to TV or film world, it's a huge problem because there's these like opposing forces that have different wants and needs. And you think about the budget that this is probably going to require. I mean, it's got to be through the roof.
Oh God.
If they raise prices, we'll know why.
Yeah.
For book one, I feel like the budget is a lot more like reasonable, but once we go into book two and beyond, we keep going. The world expands like massively, and it's just I can't even imagine. To your point, Andrew, I feel like the popularity of the series, especially in the past, like I'll say year or so, you would imagine that would have sped up the project, not slowed it down. I do think that that's why they made a statement, because they were like, I guess we should probably like calm down these book talkers and like make them know that we're still thinking about them. But I do wonder what kind of contracts SJM does have at Hulu, because it is taking so long. Is it like in perpetuity, or is it something that she can get out of and go to another streaming platform? I don't know. Cough, cough, HBO would be amazing, but we'll see. I do wonder if the reason that they're holding off, again, like I said earlier, is are they deciding just to do ACOTAR? Are they deciding what route they want to take? Because, for instance, Shadow and Bone, which for those of you who don't know, Shadow and Bone, the trilogy, is just following one of the storyline characters. But when Netflix picked it up, there is a sequel duology that goes along with Shadow and Bone. And they decided to weave all of those characters together. And it was massively successful for season 1. And then I don't know what happened with season 2. They just randomly canceled the show. It was infuriating. But are they wanting to do something like this to kind of piggyback off of that success from Netflix? I do wonder if the reason is just like they don't know what direction they're wanting to take the show.
Well, too bad they don't have 5 books for source material to pull from, huh, guys? I am I'll call myself a traditionalist when it comes to adaptations. Like I have a lot of feelings about the Harry Potter movies. I think that, they're magical and fun, but I am a book person. I am that annoying person you watch the movies with, and I'm like, that wasn't in the book. And I fully admit and own that I am one of those people, and I apologize.
No, I mean, you're not alone. And I think Max's adaptation of Harry Potter is going to be a real amazing opportunity for them to actually just follow the books. Just follow the books, y'all.
It's not that hard. I mean, I know it is hard, but it's not that hard.
Right. You have the scripts right in front of you, basically. Like, just give us what we want.
Yeah, exactly. And, same thing with ACOTAR, the fandom is intense. They love it so much. They are very passionate. And with that comes, and there are also very polarizing characters and plot things that happen in ACOTAR that the fandom is very divisive about. And it's also very divisive when it comes to the adaptation. For instance, it seems like half of them want it to be an animated series where they can really, go crazy with the magical elements of it. And then the other half are like, no, this has to be a live adaptation, right? And then don't even get me started with the fan cast. And like people have such strong opinions. And while, yes, ultimately it's all about what happens in that, creative room there with Hulu, there is so much, I'll say so much pressure to get it right because it is such a feral fandom that Nicole and I have very quickly learned. We just dropped our first ACOTAR episode last week, and it's been wonderful, but it is also like, all right, this is a totally different community than the Fourth Wing one. We got to buckle up here.
They've had longer to stew, so
exactly.
I feel like that kind of makes sense.
Oh God.
Yeah. And I say that with so much love, but it is, it's, and yeah. So I think that I think that no matter what, even if it is absolutely flawless, there are going to be plenty of people to have things to say about it. And it could just go in its own completely different direction. So it's not feeling like there's an apples to apples comparison. And it does want to do a little bit more of its own thing. I'm thinking of like The Witcher, for example, there. And I think that would be a huge risk and not the good kind.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to wrap things up on a little bit of a high note as far as the ACOTAR adaptation goes, I wanted to ask you both what your top 3 wish list is for what you'd like to see in a series adaptation.
I couldn't make top 1. I'm not that person, so I did top 3. So the thing that I love about book 1, there is so much I love about book 2, but book 1 is the groundwork laid for the rest of the series. And a lot of people look at book 1 as like, just get through it so you can get to book 2 and beyond. And I really hope that they don't make it so that this is kind of like okay, we're just going to rush through this season to get to season 2. And instead really lean into the magic that is book 1. Book 1 is one of those books that you reread after reading the rest of the series, and it is a different experience. Simultaneously, I also hope that they don't make those nuances that set up things so beautifully that you reread and you're like, oh my God, that has like 5 meanings. I hope they don't make it in your face, because when you're when you're reading it for the first time, you don't know the context and you don't know what those things mean. And I really hope they don't make it like neon sign, this is something you should be aware of. The second thing is casting for Feyre, Tamlin, and Rhysand, our main trio, I'm going to call them. I'll also throw Lucian in there. I am team live action over animation. So I do think that this casting is wildly important, specifically Feyre. She is Lexi and I, as we're deep diving, she's a survivor in this book. She is kind of a shell of herself. She's not a very fascinating character, but she's also a dreamer. She's creative. She's strong as hell. And those are really explored more in book 2 and beyond. So I hope that they find someone who's not just like shell Feyre and who can have those deeper nuances as well, and who can play her very multifaceted. And then last thing is mind to mind speak. This is a part of a lot of different fantasy things. I personally have never seen this done in a way that is not cheesy. So I do worry that when it comes to mind speak, figuring out how to do that in a way that's not weird or cheesy in the story.
I agree with you. The only thing that I really have to add, as far as at least bigger concepts, is that they don't shy away from the magic, and that it really does fully embrace this fantastical world and these magical powers. Shock of shocks. I'm on my fantasy lore pedestal here, right? Because it's a fantasy series, and yes, it absolutely is romance as well, but it does have a lot of fantasy, a lot of magic, and I really hope that that is front and center, so it has the chance to truly come to life in its own way, versus just taking a back seat to the romantic dynamics, and I'll call it more of like the human elements that we all know and can relate to. And like, I don't want the magic and the fantasy to be super cheesy. I was given the Harry Potter movies a little bit of hate earlier, but one thing that I think that they do very, very well is the magic element of it. And it really brings magic to life from our imaginations onto the screen. And I'd love to see this adaptation really lean into that magical element as well. Don't hold back.
Especially with the first Harry Potter movies, the first 2, I'd say they really spent a lot of time celebrating the magic. And that magic, that CGI has held up really, really well. You go back and watch those movies. Yeah.
Yes, like the apparating and disapparating. Like I thought that they captured that really well. And we're going to touch on this in a little bit, but like sometimes special effects just like they're not putting the money they need into, they're not giving it the time. I mean, there's been like Marvel has been rushing out projects and the CGI has suffered. Percy Jackson in the new Disney Plus adaptation has been pretty good, actually. I mean, Disney, I feel, was like taking a big risk on that. But also Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action adaptation, that's been criticized a little bit because some of the stuff isn't being adapted very well when it comes to the magic and all that. So I've been watching that. I think that the magic on screen looks good, but I also don't have a lot to compare it to. But I do, but like that 1-to-1 comparison, it's definitely not there. Yeah.
Pam, I'm curious, as someone who's also read all 5 of the ACOTAR books.
I've actually only read the first 2, but I'll try to answer your question anyway.
I would love to hear though. Regardless, what would you want to see in the screen adaptation?
Oh, that's a great question. I agree that like for me, it's going to be the casting. I feel like the casting and the chemistry between the actors is going to play a huge role here. I almost kind of feel like Hollywood has a problem casting for true chemistry. Like so often they go for the look and they hardly pay any attention to how the 2 actors play off of each other on screen. But for something like ACOTAR, where the plot really heavily relies on having chemistry and then building up the tension for the romantic element, I feel like that's really going to be key here. And then this is also like a really goofy thing to say, but I need to see like a really good cauldron, because in my head, whenever they say like thank the cauldron, I'm imagining like Harry Potter pewter size 2 dinky cauldron, and it can't be that because they use it as like, you know, a synonym almost for God.
Yeah.
So
yes.
It has to be something like massive and ornate. And I don't know. I just need like a good visual for the TV show.
So true.
I agree with all of those things. Yes.
So have our standards changed when it comes to adaptations? We'll discuss this after a quick break. Talking more about staying loyal to the core material, whether it's ACOTAR or otherwise, I'm curious, have our standards changed at all in terms of what we consider to be a satisfying adaptation? Because unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, there's odds at play with like the original creator and these people adapting it. There's money involved. There's casting involved. Do we need to start setting a bit of a lower bar? Because we set our expectations so high every time, and rarely are our expectations fulfilled. Have our standards changed?
Yes. And I think that social media and specifically just the internet as a whole, with all of us able to talk the way we are, and it kind of becomes one big echo chamber, right? Where we're all like, we have like expectations and then build up and up and up and up and up. And then all of a sudden there's these huge high expectations that would be almost impossible to actually meet. For instance, Sarah J. Maas's book that just came out, House of Flame and Shadow, I think that that's a great example of so much hype and build up. And people have very mixed feelings about that book. I'm not even going to go down that route, but very mixed feelings about it. And it did not meet expectations as a whole, just a general consensus. I'm personally a lot more forgiving when the adaptation changes are necessary changes. I think Game of Thrones in the earlier seasons is a great example. It could not possibly include all of the side plots and characters from the books because it would have been way, way, way too complicated. Like, it is just like insanely complicated in the books, and there's no way to bring that onto the screen without people just completely shutting down. And then there are other changes that remove core meaning, like I think that everything around Voldemort's backstory and the Horcruxes in Harry Potter 6, like we completely lost those elements there. And that really, to me, cheapened the on-screen adaptation. So it makes me, like when it makes me wonder why I'm even watching this, if it's just barely scratching the surface of a story that's near and dear to my heart, that's where I get frustrated. But again, sometimes those changes really are necessary. And if I can understand that, then it's like, okay, I will lean in. I will buy this. I understand that you could not include everything. And that's where I become forgiving.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because with the movies, you understand, okay, they've got time constraints that they need to hit.
Right.
So, they can't include everything, but then they promise us a TV show, which really can have as many episodes as they want, as many seasons as they want. Like there's so much room for them to adapt everything.
Yes.
So it's actually, even though I want to give them some leeway over like adapting, and I'll keep my standards a little lower. On the other hand, with the TV show, because of how much time they could potentially fill, and Harry Potter fans would absolutely eat it up, I gotta hold them to a high standard when it comes to a TV adaptation.
Exactly.
And see, this is why I hate that we've moved away from the traditional 18 to 22 episode runtime. Yeah. And it just like really sucks that for some reason these streamers that have endless funds are pigeonholing themselves to 6 to 8 episodes for a pilot season. It's like, y'all have the money for something like Harry Potter. You know that there's a built-in audience. Bump it up to 12, at least. At the very least, bump it up to 12.
Well, I'll just add on that Warner Brothers is saying, they've said multiple times now, Harry Potter the TV show is going to be at least a 10-year project. So they're committing to this, and I believe them.
I'm proud of them.
Yeah,
I'm so excited for my kids to grow up with these Harry Potter, like, because it comes out in 2026, right?
6, yeah. That's what they're targeting.
Yeah, so I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So like they, it'll be too young for it when it first comes out, but they will. That'll be something that they grow up on because their mother is going to make them.
Yeah, right. You will watch a show. Well, maybe the Harry Potter TV show, assuming it's going to be a success, maybe that will inspire other book to television adaptations. Maybe that'll, hopefully you don't have to wait this long, but maybe that'll reignite ACOTAR. Maybe that'll, I don't know, get Disney to continue moving along with Percy Jackson and that whole world. Like, this could be really good news for other books.
I love that idea, to be able to show that, yes, it can work. Like, this is what the people want, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think, I'm going to say earlier season Game of Thrones. Even like 6, up to season 6 Game of Thrones. That was a cultural phenomenon. Like, that was such an experience. And if you look at season 1 in particular, it is a copy paste from the book to the screen. And if you watch the season 1 for the first time without having read the book, it doesn't feel like a copy paste. Like, it feels like you're going on an adventure with these people. And I really hope that with any beloved book to movie, not just ACOTAR, any beloved book to movie adaptation, Fourth Wing's another great example because Amazon just purchased the rights to it. I really hope they follow a similar model of you are able to do this very cut and dry, copy paste, but in a way that doesn't feel forced. And then you can expand from there, which I mean, season 6, episode 10, Winds of Winter of Game of Thrones is so far beyond the books. And it is one of my favorite episodes of television ever. And you are you're able to do it if you just take your time with it. I think that's the big thing, is not feeling like you have to pump out content really quickly, because I think that's just the world we live in.
Yes.
Unfortunately, with Harry Potter, though, those kids are going to be growing up in front of our eyes, and they got to move.
I think they'll film don't you think they'll film the first 2 seasons back to back?
Probably
Because of that.
Yeah. Because I remember movies 1 and 2 being filmed pretty closely together, I think.
Yeah.
That's what I remember too.
It'll be, and then season 3, when they're third years, it'll be like a Brandon Stark jump where it's like, whoa, where did your beard come from?
You got tall.
Man now.
And your voice got deep.
Your voice is so low.
Yeah. How about changes that are okayed by the original creator when we're talking about adaptations? And I guess it could depend on the relationship you have with the creator. Do you like them enough? Are you still able to tolerate their ideas and how much they've already suggested changing? And there's a couple of reasons I'm asking this. Let's start with Harry Potter. It could be hard to even be satisfied with Rowling's creative decisions, even setting aside her thoughts on trans people. There were some changes to canon when Fantastic Beasts was turned into a film series, and I don't know if she signed off on these. I guess she did. Newt was able to Accio a living animal, which was not possible in the books. Jacob seemingly could see Hogwarts, which again, not possible. Dumbledore was DADA teacher, when in the books he was only a transfiguration teacher at Hogwarts.
Unforgivable.
Yeah.
Well, and
God.
I will say, and going off of that, again, personal opinions aside, I can never trust her again because she signed off on Cursed Child.
Oh, interesting.
Oh.
Okay,
And
that is a big one.
I understand that it needs to be seen in the theater. It is a play that you need to be able to visually see it. I have not had that opportunity yet. So I am going off of only having read the script, and it
is wild. I get
it has
it.
been since
Yeah.
that came out in 2016, and I still have not recovered. And like, I can't even talk about it. And so after that, I lost all trust if she signed off on that.
Yeah, that's fair. I
I
understand.
do almost look at it like for I'm trying to put my creator hat. So if I was in, let's say, Sarah J. Maas's, if I was in Sarah J. Maas's or Rebecca Yarros' shoes right now, I would look at it as almost like, okay, a do-over. I'm gonna call it a do-over, but like, it's the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going back to square one again. Is there anything I would change now that I am closer to the end of my story? For those types of changes, I'm all in. I'm like, abso-freaking-lutely, take me on an unexpected journey. I love it. If it's for shock factor and shock factor alone, to like surprise don't give me
Cursed Child.
surprises. I'm not
Yeah.
watching this. I don't want to have surprises. Like, if it's truly just for shock factor, I don't see a point of it. And I think that Game of Thrones, especially as it went into its later seasons, it was just shock factor after shock factor, and that was just not necessary. So for me, changes are fine if the creator is looking at it like, oh, this actually makes more sense in the long term. Or, I mean, movies, TV shows are a different medium than books. If they're making the change because the medium requires it, absolutely, I'm all for it. The big thing is just if it is there to oversimplify something where it feels watered down or dumbed down, or if it's just there for shock factor, I'm like,
Goes back to my idea where if it changes the core meaning, get it out of here. I don't want it. We fell in love with the core meaning. We fell in love with that core story. If I don't have that, then you have lost me as an audience member.
Yeah. I think I can get behind like changing some of the rules of magic, but it's so hard when you're talking about especially fantasy because there's so much lore that comes along with anything before you even adapt it. But to Nicole's point about shock factor and getting back to what Andrew was saying about all these changes with Fantastic Beasts, having Professor McGonagall there, right, is like that not only changes the rules of magic, which I could forgive maybe, it like completely changes your own timeline.
yes.
And timeline that you have published online on your definitive source of all things in your universe.
Like spiraling all over again.
So like that doesn't make sense, you know? So when it's something like that, it's like, now you've taken me out of this story.
Yeah.
And I get that like we are people having this conversation as individuals that obsess over things like that. For the casual viewer, it's not going to make very much of a difference. But I also think that in instances like this, where you have these massive franchises with built-in audiences, like you kind of have to pander to them in some small way. And it would be so easy to pander to them just by getting like the timeline straight, at least, at the very least.
The McGonagall thing was probably to appease those normal, average, outside the Harry Potter fandom bubble audiences. So there's another recognizable character in the Harry Potter series. But then that comes at the cost of pissing off the real fans who made this spinoff happen in the first place, thanks to the success of Harry Potter.
Right. It's like the Hogwarts thing. It's like, okay, maybe like that, like it's a recent addition that Muggles can't see Hogwarts. You know, like you can explain some things away. You can't explain away that. That's like changing somebody's birthday.
Yeah. And it's a death by a thousand cuts thing too. Like, I'm willing to look past a little thing here or there. Like, I get it over time. It's been 20 years. You got to maybe make a change or two if it serves the story and adds to it. But once you start making a lot of changes, that's where it becomes infuriating. I thought the Breaking Bad spinoff, which was a prequel, Better Call Saul, did an amazing job of building on the original story without disrupting it and adding so much to Breaking Bad that when you go back and watch Breaking Bad, you get to keep things in mind you learn in Better Call Saul that you never would have known without Better Call Saul. And it changes some elements of Breaking Bad in a good way.
That's awesome.
Well, and one thing that the Harry Potter movies did do really well is because we're not in Harry's really close third person, like we're not seeing through his eyes, basically. It was more of an opportunity to go through other people's eyes and go to other stories and, you know, have things more on like a Snape and Dumbledore conversation that doesn't happen in the books, but we get to see on screen. And like, I especially with like going to ACOTAR, like we're in Feyre's head the entire time. It is first person. You only see what she sees. Same thing with Violet in Fourth Wing. And if you take this to a movie adaptation, you have the opportunity to do scenes that aren't in the book because it's, you know, people who are maybe not that first person character. That's the kind of stuff that really excites me, is like, oh, I get to see like a deleted scene from the book. Almost. So long as it fits with the storyline and the characters and like they're not acting out of character. You know?
I think as we talk about, you know, like with the original creator signing off on it, and we've talked so much about the fandoms, and to your point about like how it was like the Harry Potter fandom that brought this, that brought Fantastical Beasts even onto as an opportunity, and then they kind of ruined it for everybody. I think that there is a point where these stories are bigger than the original creator.
Yeah.
And yes, of course, it is in their mind. We would not possibly have these stories if it was not for the original creator. But there is a point where it is the fandom that is really driving it, and who is fueling it, and who is keeping it going, who is really building it out into the magicalness that it is. And so when the adaptations do them a disservice, and yes, like there are like little things like there, you can be nitpicky all you want, but when it does start fundamentally making big changes like the timeline or core meanings or huge plot lines that were central to the story, that's where then it is I'll say it bluntly, it's an insult to that fandom that you're doing this for in the first place. And that is where it's like, okay, who are you really doing this for? And you have to like, in those creative rooms, I have no idea. I have no idea how Hollywood works, but I can imagine that they start it's their own little echo chamber, and they start figuring out the logistics or shortcuts, or like, well, we need to make this work for this reason. And they don't pause and say, wait, we need to bring this back to the people. Who is this for? Like, they need to remember who this is for. And I think that that's where some adaptations can get lost.
And if you do things right, by the way, the fans are expecting, they will reward you handsomely. They'll go to the theme parks. They'll go buy the merchandise. Like, it's all cyclical. Like, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours.
Exactly.
Like, it's just that simple.
What are some adaptations that you think have done a really great job?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. So I haven't finished watching Percy Jackson, but it seems like that one's been going pretty well. The episodes that I've seen, I've been very impressed that like the special effects are good. They look pretty good. Rick Riordan, who actually was deeply involved with the TV series, he's the author of Percy Jackson. It is he's very connected with the fans, and he cares a lot about the TV adaptation, which goes a long way. On his website, he had written, when you adapt a book for screen, there have to be some changes because it's a different medium. For instance, in the book, you are in Percy's POV the entire time, and his voice is constantly in your head. You can't really do that the same way in a TV show. Even with 8 episodes, you can't show every single description of action or line of dialogue from the book because it wouldn't translate and feel the same. It's weird, but you sort of have to change things to make the story feel the same. I think, though, that when you watch the show, it will feel like the book and you will say, yes, that is the story of the Lightning Thief. That's the most important thing to me. So he really cares. I'm trying to think of other adaptations. Do you two have any that jump out to you?
The big ones that I think of that are like a full finished, well done adaptation. Because if we're just going partial, I think Game of Thrones is a big one. Shadow and Bone's another really good one that I think did really well.
Witcher season 1 was absolutely phenomenal.
Witcher season 1,
how it brought the short stories to life and the full. Oh my gosh! And then starts going off the rails. I still like it, but
we're not even going to talk about 2 and 3. But I think something that did really well through 3 or I guess 4 movies is I think the Hunger Games did a really good job.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm going to shout to our Discord real quick because we just had a big Discord event of like book to movies, and our two of our mods did like a huge dissertation basically on the Hunger Games adaptation, and they did a phenomenal job. So the only reason that's in my mind is because of Spiral.
Yes, Spiral. that was a really I think because again it made those not fundamental, but it made those necessary shifts because yes, you are not in Katniss Everdeen's head in the same way that you are in the books, and so it brought in a few new elements. But man, I really loved those two. That was a great example.
Yeah, I don't think they needed to split Mockingjay. It felt like a lot, but other than that, Hunger Games and Catching Fire in particular were wonderful adaptations.
I think that it was the cool thing to do back then, or split the last movie into 2.
Twilight, Harry Potter.
Yeah. Even like Breaking Dawn, I appreciated that part 2, they deviated from the book at the end to give audience a surprise. Do you remember that big...
Remember that.
Oh, well, there was like this dream sequence where everybody was dying at the end of Breaking Dawn Part 2, and people were losing their minds. They were like, oh my God, they're going to kill off everybody at the end of this movie. That's not what happens in the book, but it was like all a dream, that type of thing.
That was lost somewhere in my head. Thank you for bringing that to the surface.
You blocked it out. I understand. I appreciated it simply because it left book fans surprised. Like it was a great cinematic moment.
Another one that I think did well, and I know that the hardcore fandom is going to significantly disagree with me here, but I think that Lord of the Rings, for how intensively high fantasy those books are, the book to movie adaptation was really well done. Yes, you lost some of those central plot lines and you lost some of the essence, but I watched all of those movies and then I read the books and it was like, okay, like, yes, I felt like I was getting the exact same story, but with a whole lot more meaning behind it, rather than what the heck is going on here, which you know how sometimes when you read a book or a movie and it's like, wait, is this the same thing? And I loved because that was a huge task, and I think that they executed that as well as they possibly could have.
Plus, they gave fans the extended edition, so if you wanted more, you can get a lot more. And then there's the fans who only watch the extended editions.
That's me.
That's all I watch.
I'm also right now watching The Office extended versions, and it's like literally called for super fans. And it's like, that's some good marketing right there.
Yeah. So as we wind down this discussion, Nicole and Lexi, as larger voices in the fandom. Wow, when we wrote this note, I must have been feeling pompous. Do we all try to temper the expectations of our listeners? This question's been on my mind recently because Harry Potter fans are looking forward to this adaptation, but inevitably, the TV adaptation, but inevitably, there's going to be some disappointment. It happens. Do you find yourselves trying to do this on Fantasy Fangirls?
So my initial reaction is yes, we want to temper expectations. However, We've already been through this once with Iron Flame and that book coming out. And we were fully immersed in all of the speculation, because it's just like it is different because it was on the same medium. It was, it was a sequel to the same a book series versus an adaptation where there is obviously going to be those differences. But we went full throttle with the fandom. We were spearheading the fandom with all of that, and that was partly why Fantasy Fangirls got so big, was all of the hoopla around the upcoming book. And and so when I do think about, like, for instance, like the ACOTAR, let's say that they do start, getting the fire under their asses and they start actually making progress with this and it's going to come out. Like, I do want for Nicole and I to be more mindful in a sense of looking at it from a more logical perspective versus just as really big fans, because we do already do that with our deep dives. Like, for instance, there are some characters that make some choices that our first reaction is to shit on them or to make fun of them, or like have those fun jokes. But then it is like, okay, but there is a reason behind this. There is a reason why this is happening, and we also want to explore that, and we try our best to create that balance. And I think that also goes right into managing expectations as well.
I agree completely. And I'll even piggyback off saying that when it comes to a different medium adaptation, so not like looking at a sequel, but instead looking at a different adaptation, it is so easy to look at it like, oh, I can't wait to see this one line from Taryn, or I can't wait to see this one moment with Feyre. And when that gets in the way, then you're just like looking for it this entire time. And if it doesn't happen, it taints the entire experience and yada, yada, yada. So for me, the big thing is I want to be a consistent reminder, bringing it back to the forefront of our brains consistently of this is a different medium. Go into it with open expectations. Now, is that just as much for my brain as it is for the people in our circle? Absolutely. But like with the Harry Potter adaptation, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best in going into it as a blank slate, rather than being like, I can't wait to see spew finally on screen.
And like for me, it's like, I'm sorry, I have been waiting for 25 years for spew. Like, my I feel bad because it's like, I know I'm going to go, and it's like, okay, I have to temper my expectations, but it's also like, come on, I've waited literally more than half my 2/3 of my life for this, please.
Yeah, I know.
Something I did with season 2 of Shadow and Bone that worked really well for me is I went in the first time as the hyped, like, expectations at 1,000,000%, like super, super engaged. And then I had my cry because it didn't live up to my expectations. And I was really pissed about it. And then I went back and I rewatched it as a clean slate, and I enjoyed it a lot more. I did the same thing with Crescent City 3 that just came out. I went in, I had my want to throw the book against the wall, and then I went and reread it, and I enjoyed it a lot more. So that has worked well with me the few times that I've done it. So I might do something similar, but instead of having a huge temper tantrum, it might be nice to just go in as round 2.
And I will also say that the temper tantrums that we might have, it's not publicly. It's like it's very important to us to have what we are saying make sense, and also
that's for text messages between you and I.
Because there is that sense of we creating a very positive space too in our communities. I'm sure that you can relate to that as well, where it's just like sometimes if there is something a little bit negative to talk about, like for instance, like when we did our Crescent City 3 reactions, while yes, there were moments where we were giving it a hard time, we also really purposefully made sure that we were celebrating it for what it is. And that is what we ultimately are all about, is celebration. So even if something does not live up to our expectations, we want to be able to pull out the good in it rather than just harping on the bad, because that is not fun for anybody to listen to. And again, it goes right back to the top of the conversation, where this is all about escapism and it's fantasy worlds. And like, yes, this is our full-time job. Like, we love this so much, but at the end of the day, it's fiction. It doesn't ultimately matter that much. And I say that like with all the love of my heart for all of these series in the genre, right? So
yeah. We criticize because we care. That's what we say at MuggleCast. When people are like, you're too hard.
We need to steal that.
Yeah.
We criticize because we care.
when people say you're too hard, it's like, hey, well, first of all, we're a podcast. Like, we have to talk about something. We can't all just be like, yeah, that was amazing. We have to offer some.
I loved it when Dumbledore screamed at Harry in the fourth movie.
Right, perfect. Moving on. No, but so yeah, there's like a balance. You criticize because you care, but then you also celebrate changes that might be made, stuff like that.
Yes, exactly.
And also the changes can be good for like us as voices in the fandom, because you're then talking about why did they make these changes?
Yes, exactly.
You know, what messages can we get from it now?
That's exactly what we try to do, yeah.
One of the things that we're doing as we go into ACOTAR is like there is one character who's very, very polarizing in the fandom. And Lexi and I are
I
constantly...
don't even know which one you're talking about because there are that many.
There's one in particular that we've had many conversations about. And one of the things that Lexi and I try to do, and I do think that Lexi does a much better job at this than I do, is looking at it from all angles and saying, like, for instance, if we're looking at a book to movie adaptation, let's say something happened that we're flipping tables over, throwing our hands up in the air over. One of the things that we want to do is like sit down and be like, why was this change made? Like, let's look into, was there something going on with the actor? Was there something that the director was wanting to do down the line? Like, kind of, and what that does is it also provides comfort for the fandom, because if they hear the why of like, oh, it's not just to insult me as a fan and for aggravating reasons. Oh no, instead it's for X, Y, or Z creative reason. I think it just like creates some of that closure with the anger that we might experience.
The context is so essential, and it is our duty to provide that context, even if sometimes it's context people don't want to hear, but it is still necessary. And we're not trying to change minds, but it is just, okay, that's fine for you to feel that way, but just here's some extra context behind it too.
Yeah. And sometimes people just don't want to hear an opinion that's not their own. They want to just be told what they already know, what they already feel.
Oh, Andrew, we know that so well. It's been a week for us.
Oh, boy.
Been a week.
Lord.
This discussion, I think, has been triggering in a few ways. We brought up Chris Child, and now this.
Oh man, but I'm excited for it no matter what. Like just to see what we love come alive in a new way.
Yeah,
there's something magical about that in and of itself.
All right, well, this has been so much fun, and we're going to continue talking with Nicole and Lexi in After Dark. What are we going to talk about today, Pam, who's been quiet for a few minutes, by the way, because she was having internet problems, but she's back now.
Technical difficulties. So we would... no fantasy conversation is complete without talking about smut, since romantasy is huge right now. So you can join us in After Dark for some fun smutty convo. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different aspects about how this plays into the rise in the fantasy genre online.
Yeah. Sounds good. And Nicole, we didn't really know you were like a big smut fan, I don't think. So
let me say, I'm a big smut fan out of Lexi and I. Like, I have lines though. I have some hard lines in the sand when it comes to smut. But we can talk about that in After Dark.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Pam and I planned this discussion ourselves, so it was a pleasant surprise that you're interested in smut. Let's say.
I am.
After Dark is part of Mega Millennial, which is our main show, ad-free with After Dark attached to the end. Spotify users can just tap into the show and you'll see the Patreon banner, and you'll be able to access the Patreon audio benefits like Mega Millennial right within Spotify. We've also got other benefits at patreon.com/millennial, like our monthly variety shows, our new roll call benefit, our virtual recording studio, our planning docs, all kinds of things. So patreon.com/millennial. And if you would prefer to just support us through Apple Podcasts, you can, again, tap into the show and you'll get access to Mega Millennial. So time now for some recommendations.
I wanted to make a book recommendation since we've been talking a lot about books this episode. So I wanted to recommend What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. This is the first in a new series, and it's young adult. It's set in the 19th century, and it follows this young girl. Well, not young girl. She's a young woman, I should say, as she ventures to Egypt following the death of her parents, because she starts realizing that the cause of their death isn't really lining up. So she goes out there to investigate that. And there is like a small fantasy element with like some magical properties as far as ancient artifacts goes. There's a love interest. There's like the historical element. So if you're into all of that kind of stuff, then this is probably a good book to pick up. It's really fast paced. So would highly recommend if you're just looking for a quick, fun read.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
I want to recommend A View from My Seat.com. If you're ever looking for concert tickets or sport tickets, whatever, and you're like, okay, maybe I want the seat, but what does the view look like from that seat? A View from My Seat.com. And how it works is people just upload photos from their seats, and you can tap into the venue, and then you tap into like the section, and then you can get close to the aisle that you want. Yeah, Nicole, you seem interested in this.
I'm having an out-of-body experience. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Nicole, when was the last time you went to a concert?
Oh, it's been years, but I'm very excited for people who don't go to
The
concerts.
kids these days, they really figured it out. Yeah, it's just a nice way to get some peace of mind when you're committing to tickets. Like, oh, okay, that looks like a good view. And you can see the view, like people upload photos from a concert or a sporting event, whatever happens at the venue. So I have found it very helpful over the years. So A View from My Seat.com.
That's
Nicole,
awesome.
what do you recommend? Yeah.
I earlier teased that I was going to recommend dramatized audiobooks, but I'm actually going to expand on that and recommend something called Everend. Everend is a app that allows you to listen to audiobooks. You can read ebooks. You can listen to dramatized audiobooks.
There's even
musical theater
podcasts.
student
People listen
for
to us on podcasts. Yeah.
Sheet music is on there. I was a musical theater kid for a long time, so having that. And I studied in college. That really diminished my knowledge of this. So I use that for that a lot. But it's like $15 a month, and you just get unlimited access to everything. And for people who are book nerds, it can be a very expensive hobby because you're buying a $16 to $25 book every single time, whether it's audiobooks or books. And Everend's just a great way to read as much as you want with just a monthly membership.
Awesome.
And then mine, all right, I'm going to have two separate ones, and I'm going to stay within fantasy. So one is actually a new, and okay, so full disclosure, they were a sponsor, but I'm absolutely obsessed. So this is like a non-sponsored part here, is that it's called Anomaly, and it is a podcast, but it is fantasy meditation. And so it is just absolutely lovely. Like I have a really hard time turning my brain off at night. I usually listen to the Harry Potter audiobooks. There's only so many times over so many years that you can just listen to them on cycle. And like, that is why I know all of the Harry Potter chapters by heart, as you well know, Andrew. Anyway.
Yes.
And so this really just has a wonderful, like I mentally brew potions, and I get to choose what the magic is going to be. And it's just so lovely and relaxing. Anyway, I've been obsessed with it lately. Another recommendation of mine, going back to books though, here is Throne of Glass. We didn't talk too much about it here, but it is one of the 3 Sarah J. Maas book series. It is the only complete one, although she has teased otherwise, but we're not going down that road. And it is 7, 8 books, and it is absolutely fantastic. I'm not even fully through them. I just finished Heir of Fire, which is like the 3rd one, and I am absolutely obsessed. It is very high. It's high fantasy. It's got some romance, but it's not like to the level of ACOTAR. So if you're like, I like fantasy, but I'm not as crazy about the smut, that is your book. And I also say that having not read the other one, so I apologize if I just led you down a bad road. But as of right now, it's not as steamy.
Okay.
It takes a while to get steamy, but it's not Crescent City or later ACOTAR books steamy. I will say that.
Yeah. So the Throne of Glass series.
Nicole's been helping me behind the scenes here with the link to the name of this first rec. Anomaly is spelled ANOMALIE, and it's seekanomaly.com for anybody who might be looking.
And available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, they're on like Spotify.
Sweet.
Anyway, just if you like that kind of meditation stuff, and you like fantasy, put the 2 and 2 together. I just love it so much.
Lexi's been lit on this thing.
Wow, okay.
Well,
speaking of fantasy, Lexi and Nicole, where can our listeners find you?
So you can find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We are also on YouTube. A lot of people love watching us because apparently we're very animated. And then we are also on social media. We have a big presence on TikTok and Instagram at Fantasy Fangirls Pod. We have lots more content, lots more there too. And of course, fantasyfangirls.com for all of our episodes, for even more on us and all of that fun stuff.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun.
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Yeah. And listeners, we'll have links in the show notes as well. Also, make sure you're following Millennial in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And we'd appreciate a review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also email us, millennialshow@gmail.com, or you can use the contact form or anonymous confessional on millennialshow.com. And then finally, we're on social media, Millennial Show on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Threads. Half of those platforms were down today.
Yes. Oh, yes. You were affected too.
Yeah, it affected everybody. And then over on TikTok, we are Millennial Pod. After Dark will start in a moment for patrons and Apple Podcast subscribers. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm Andrew.
I'm Pamela.
I'm Lexi.
And I'm Nicole.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.